Okay, so we're back, and this is going to be round 3 of the kind of more rhythmical type quick sketch. We're going to take, everything we talked about so far and just apply it for another round of 7 minutes and then 3 minutes, 7 minutes and then 5 minutes and then 3 minutes. So we're going to work through those and just piece by piece kind of look at each individual pose and how I'm going to break it down and look for kind of the little idiosyncrasies that exist within each pose, because, doing those turnarounds is helpful and it's a good start to understanding how those rhythms work. But you hit a lot of, things that you don't expect when you see different poses, and when you start seeing the body from different angles, you start realizing that those rhythms don't always work the same way every single time. So it's good to be able to see them used in a variety of angles. And as we progress throughout this program, we're going to see some more complex poses, some more compressed poses where the rhythms don't work at all. And we'll see some more, simple type stuff and just a variety of things as we get into the more structural parts and then a little bit of tonal type stuff. So moving on, again, we're going to be looking right now mostly for those kind of building blocks that we're using, the things that we use to solve the puzzle, which is a mix of plumb lines and negative shapes and angles, and then just kind of comparative measurement in general. So first up, we're going to have some male poses. We're going to alternate. I think last time we did female and then male and then female. This time it's going to be male and then female and then male. Not that it matters, but that's what we're doing. So here we go. So 7 minutes starting now. First up, I know right off the bat I'm looking at a side pose, so I'm probably going to be thinking of that side abstraction that I use, if you can think back to that. Start with the head. Always start with the head, neck, and shoulders. So we're going to go find kind of that cranial mass type shape, bring down the front plane of the head and connect up the jaw. Down in through here, drop the neck down. Should look something like that. Then we're going to come down and connect this collarbone, which is going to sit right in here, kind of shoot off that direction. And then we have the trapezius coming down, connecting right down about there into the shoulder. And so that shoulder, I'm just going to drop an oval in there right now just to kind of represent where it goes. Because again, we don't want to get overly anatomical right now. The whole point of this is just to think of rhythms and rhythmical relationships, and just using shapes and things like ovals to represent just kind of where things go. So we're going to drop the center line. I can see using my plumb lines, I know it's going to start here, come out past the head, probably to about here maybe, and then it's going to end up lined up with about the front of the head. So we're going to have this nice long C curve. And I'm remembering my C curves, S curves, and straights, and that's mostly what I'm focused on. I'm thinking side abstraction, seeing a little bit past that center line, and then I'm going to come in and kind of find where the scapula is going to sit. Rhythmically carry that through. And then from the neck down to the hip. And again, plumb line to where the hip's going to go. It's going to line up with that part of the trapezius. And I can see about where I think it needs to start, right about there. Then it's going to drop back direction and flatten a little bit. It shouldn't come much past his shoulder from what I'm seeing. So I think it's going to sit, bottom of his torso will sit about there. And that looks pretty good to me. I'm looking at, head versus torso relationship. And it looks pretty close. So I can come in now, find kind of where his hip is going to sit. Probably right about in there, maybe a little bit lower actually, now that I look at it. Not much lower, right about There, I can come and drop that rib cage in, which is going to sit and kind of fill in this gap. Nice clean oval. And then just kind of find a little bit of that contour real quick. We're going to have kind of scapula coming down to rib cage. And then from behind the rib cage, a little bit of the oblique coming down that way, you know, so we can kind of see it starting to take shape a little bit. I know we have the rib cage kind of poking out here and then connecting down into abdominal muscle. Kind of sitting here and then back that way. That's going to connect up right down in there at the bottom of the abdomen. You know, and then the legs, we're just going to keep really rhythmical. You know, for the most part, those Riley rhythms, I feel like, are usually focused more on the torso. You know, and as I was saying before, legs are really just kind of a mix of C curves and straights. You know, you can keep them really, really simple because we're just trying to figure out where everything's going to be placed and where everything's going to work proportionally with the things around it. You know, so really I'm just trying to figure out the length of this leg and the width. And I'd say it's going to come back that direction a bit. Foot's actually going the other direction. Again, try not to get too caught up in feet. I mean, it's good to indicate where they're going to go, but you don't want to spend so much time on feet that you neglect everything else, because that's something that you can get into more on a longer type drawing. You know, next, I know negative shapes are a big thing, and I have this other leg coming out here. I need to figure out where that's going to go exactly. And I can look at this negative shape, which I can see sits right about here, and then sort of cuts back that direction. It creates this little triangle right here. So I know this leg is going to have to work in conjunction with that shape. You know, so I can sort of design the rest of that leg around it. Make sure that knee's going to come out far enough. Again, just kind of long, sweeping lines. This foot's kind of tweaked a bit also. You know, so if we're just talking about rhythmical stuff, I mean, that's fine. That's more than enough for the legs at that point. You know, maybe we can come in, add this arm on real quick. You know, it's going to connect that into this hand, which again, just keep it simple. It's going to sit right about there. And then that is the end of our time. So, I mean, that's the end of the 7 minutes. So, I mean, if that's what you got done, that's fine. You don't need the whole thing down and completed in 7 minutes. I mean, that's not the goal, really. I'm going to add this arm on real quick just so you guys can see it, but normally I would just move on at this point and not really worry about this arm. That's pretty good. I mean, in terms of rhythmical quick sketch, I think that's really what you're looking for. You know, so I'm going to go ahead and prep the next one. And again, quick analysis when you're first starting, just figure out generally what type of rhythm, which of those rhythm sets we're looking for. And again, it's going to be kind of from the side, but much more stretched out and elongated. So again, I'm thinking side abstraction, 7 minutes, starting now. So again, start with the head. We're going to have simple head shape. A little bit of an angle, like that. I need to flatten that out a tiny bit. So his head's at an angle, sitting that direction. And it probably needs to be taller to get his head type, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Next, I know his neck is sitting like this. And remember when we talked about necks, we're just keeping them simple, 2 C curves, and then you can build off of that a little bit if you need to. Trapezius, I can see it's going to sit down below. I'm looking at plumb line, making sure that sits significantly below his chin quite a bit, is where that should line up. Again, find clavicle. Looks like it's just coming straight across that direction. And again, we're looking at them from the side. So we're going to have kind of that acromion process sitting maybe out a little bit farther than that. About there. And then his shoulder is going to sit right here. Again, just drop a nice oval in, keep it light enough that you can go back and change it if you need to. And then he's got a really kind of exaggerated posture, so we're going to have a pretty extreme C curve for this center line. It's going to drop down something like that, I think. I think it's going to curve back in a little more at the bottom. Probably about like that. And then again, kind of visualize just where I think the scapula is sitting back here. The neck out to the hip. And again, using plumb lines, I know his hip is going to be almost underneath his chin. It's going to have to line up about here. So I know this is going to come back out this direction. Glutes are going to sit here. About like that. His rib cage being pulled back pretty far, so it's sitting at quite a bit of an angle. So it's going to sit, and he also has a pretty big rib cage. Something like that. So underneath this arm, we have his lat, latissimus coming down this direction. His rib cage kind of going off that way, and then some of his oblique connecting right down in there. And that's coming out to his glutes this direction. I can already tell with this torso, that head's going to end up being too small, so I'm going to have to go up and make that head shape a bit larger. That's fine. Again, I know we talked about that before. That's pretty common for quick sketch, is to have to go back and adjust that head shape periodically. So there's nothing to worry about. Come in, find where the hip is going to sit. It's going to sit kind of about where that oblique connects, so it's going to be right down in there. kind of that little connection point for the shoulder and the pec. Right about in there. And then this leg is going to be super rhythmical. You know, just a nice S curve. It's going to sweep back this direction. Back that direction. And then his foot's going to sit about there, I think. Again, keeping this made out of C curves, S curve straights, nothing more. You know, his other leg is just running back behind this one. Some sort of foot shape. Again, not getting too worried about the feet, not getting caught up in anything. You know, and then his arm way off to the side and super rhythmical. I mean, this is almost exactly what I was talking about when I said earlier, you know, arms can just be two C curves or a C curve and two straights. I mean, this one fits that almost perfectly. I mean, we have kind of a C curve in here. That's the end of our 7 minutes. So, I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, I feel like I got quite a bit down. And there's no reason to have any more than this at this point. But for this arm, I mean, real quick, I'll just show you what I was talking about. You know, C curve on the inside, two straights on the outside. Make it a little bit wider though, because it's a little bit too thin up here. You know, and then his hand is just sitting back in there. You know, not worried about fingers or anything, just figure out where it goes, where to place it. You know, so that's pretty good. Come back, maybe add a little bit to the head. His head's pretty tall. So always at the end, get back and look at it and make sure that head and torso look right. And if you need to go back and adjust the head and make it bigger, that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So we'll go ahead and move on to our third one. Third 7-minute pose. And, you know, again, I'm looking at it real quick. It's going to be kind of like that 3/4 abstraction. So I'm trying to think back to that and remember exactly what that's going to look like. And see if there's anything else I need to know. Probably not, but just keep in mind, you know, all of those same tools that we were using before: plumb lines, negative shapes, comparative measurement, angles, all that stuff. So here we go. We're going to start with the head again. It's going to sit right in here. We have head down to the neck, which is sitting about like this. Again, just two C curves, nice and simple. clavicles running almost straight right across here. And I'm just checking that distance between clavicle and chin, making sure that looks about right. And then we have trapezius coming down. Connecting about over here. And again, just nice oval for the shoulder. Sitting out that direction. We're getting a little bit of the shoulder on this side, just like a little tiny triangular piece of shoulder sticking out there. I do feel like it needs to come out a little bit farther though. This chest is about there. I think this shoulder is going to sit about like that. Yeah, it looks about right. So then we're going to drop that center line. Again, nice C curve coming out and down. Not worried so much about where it's going to stop. Just nice, even, smooth line. And then from this shoulder, coming in this direction. And again, from the neck out to the hip, using our plumb lines again, saying, okay, hip is going to sit right about along in here is where it's going to start. So neck out to hip. It's going to sit right about there. And then his glutes will sit kind of back in here a bit. You know, so that's going to be kind of like the end of the torso, right down about there. And again, I'm looking and comparing that height to the head, and I think it's okay for now. We have some of this other hip, or the other oblique, kind of sticking out over here a little bit. Not bad. So I'll go ahead and drop this rib cage in. Right about there. So he's got a little bit of his lat coming down and connecting, disappearing behind the rib cage. And then rib cage down into oblique. We have oblique connecting down to the hip, right down in there. Down to the other oblique on the other side. That seems like a decent torso size. You know, we can come up and add, I think he's got a little more chest connecting down to rib cage and then down to oblique. Again, so we have one leg that's looking really kind of rhythmical. Sitting here. Coming out this way. So I might start with this one because the other one's more foreshortened. So I mean, that one's going to be a little bit tougher and more along the lines of what we'll be talking about in the next section is kind of more, a little bit more structural type things. But you should be able to get them to work rhythmically also. So I included some on here. It's going to come down that direction. Well, let's change how I did that. Rather than follow the calf, I think I'm going to start almost where the bone would sit, kind of more back this direction, and this direction down into the foot. And then come and add the calf back on. Shrink that foot up a little bit because I got too big. Just always watch out. I mean, things in quick sketch tend to grow as you work your way down. You know, so just be aware of that. And try and keep an eye on it as best you can. Next, from the sartorius. Sorry, so that's the end of that 7 minutes. So that's technically the first, the last of that, this last batch of rhythmical drawings. And then the rest of this leg we can just leave. Let's just add a little like kind of C curve on there with a foot coming out from under it. You know, that's good enough for our foreshortened foot. I might add a leg or some of this arm on real quick. Again, C curve and two straights. That nice rhythmical arm, except I'm going to make it drop the elbow a little bit. His hand is going to sit right about there. The other arm's kind of disappearing. Okay, so I mean, that's pretty much it for the 7 minute ones. Go to the next page. So now we're going to start speeding things up a little bit again. So remember, maybe to work a little bit smaller and not worry so much if you don't get the whole thing down, you know. And again, just kind of analyze it real quick before you start. And think about what type of abstraction you're going to use and what type of pose it is. And just kind of generally formulate a plan. Maybe look at a couple of the main plumb lines or some of the major angles. And, you know, immediately I can just look up there and just see how the hip's going to relate to the head, how the center line is going to relate to the head and the other side of the hip. So 5 minutes, starting now. So here we go. Start with the head. Again, just nice basic head shape. Two C curves for the neck. See where that clavicle is going to sit, probably right about there. And then the trapezius coming down on each side that way. Then rhythmically it's going to come over this way. Connect right about there. And looking at her shoulder, making sure that lines up correctly with her head. I can see in the reference her shoulder almost hits her chin if I use a plumb line right across there. So it seems pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. Other shoulder is sitting down here. Again, lower than the other one, and that angle looks about right from there to there. So then come in, drop a center line, which is going to come out pretty far. I mean, it's going to come out at least that far, and then swoop back this direction. Again, I know I'm using that 3/4 abstraction, so I'm going to find some of this shoulder, cut in, and then down, about like that. And then out to the hip. She's got her hip, crunched up this way quite a bit. So it's coming out here and sort of down that way. And her leg is going to sit probably right about there. So then her hip on this side, again, plumb line should be sitting somewhere right about there. Come and drop that rib cage in there. And again, I can see a little bit of lat down to rib cage, and then we're getting some compression right in here because of the way the pose is. Remember we have kind of this pinch side and this stretch side. Hip's going to come down here. Rib cage is going to sit down here a bit more. Find that connection of the bottom of the abdomen into the hip. It's going to sit right about there. Then we have leg rhythm. In that direction. And then just judge the length of the leg quickly. You know how that relates up to the torso. I feel like it should be about that long. And then goes this way. Again, I'm just using C curves. Keeping it really simple for right now. This part I might use an S curve, C curve, a C curve, kind of locked together into an S curve. Come down that way. The other leg, immediately I can see there's going to be a little negative shape, little triangle that's going to sit right about there, and it's kind of foreshortened, so it's going to sit. That's it. That is the end of 5 minutes. So I'm going to finish this leg, and then I'll move on to the next one. Again, just looking for that C curve that kind of fits that leg. So there you go. I mean, if that's what you got, no arms, no feet, then I think you did well. I mean, it establishes the pose. I know exactly where everything's going to go. I know how each part relates to every other part. Let me go ahead and add the breaths real quick just so you guys can see rhythmically how I would line those up. I think that's pretty good. So moving on to the next. We're gonna have a back pose. So again, thinking back, to that kind of back abstraction that I was using for those, when we did the turnarounds to study the abstraction, and her arms are up. So this is gonna be a bit tougher. Things are gonna get a little more difficult as we go on. So immediately I know we're gonna have a head shape that's gonna be kind of covered by her arms and stuff. So if her head shape is going to sit here, and her neck is kind of coming out this direction, we have trapezius here and connecting down that way. Automatically, I can see that's going to run down into her shoulder. She's covering a lot of her head. And then we have shoulder on this side. We're getting a little bit of pinching right here. And up into shoulder. This side, her shoulder is sitting about here. On this side, her shoulder sits about like that. And then her arms are coming up and making kind of this boxy shape up here. But again, I'm not going to get too caught up in what's going on up in that section because that can get pretty complex pretty quickly. And I want to stay away from complex for right now. So again, get back to just that simple back abstraction that we used. We're going to have that 7th cervical vertebrae, which is sitting right about here from that angle. And then our center line is coming back this direction. And then maybe a little bit of an S curve to it. It's coming this way and then like that. So her arms are up, so they're gonna these will connect like this. Like that. Remember, that triangle that we put in is going to come down to her sacrum and not all the way down to kind of the equivalent of the front pose, which would be kind of more the pubic bone on the other side. From here, and then we're going to go from there out to the hip. Come out this way and down. And then this way. Again, using plumb lines to figure out where these are going to go and how they're going to line up with the shoulders. The bottom of her torso, I would say, is going to sit probably right about there. So knowing that, now I can come back in and drop this rib cage in. She's going to sit out this way. So we're getting a little bit of her lat coming down, and then rib cage, and then we're getting a little bit of compression on this side also. Then out to her hip. Now on this side, we're seeing some of the scapula here, and then out to rib cage here. Sorry, that's the end of the 5 minutes, but I'm going to keep going because that one took me longer than it should have. I want you guys to be able to see how to do these back poses. So again, look for that lat rhythm, which is going to run right in through there. The scapula are sitting back in here. Have kind of that flat spot that can sit right above the sacrum. We can tie the hips together from side to side. The gluteal cleft. Run down this way. That's a decent torso. So then just remember these rhythms where we're going to have kind of that separation. Well, first I'd say put the hip rhythm in on each side. So about like that. Then we have the separation of gluteus medius and maximus, and that rhythm is going to run right up in through here. Yeah, it's about right. And then come in and just add these legs on real quick. Some really simple gestural type legs. In fact, I might even just do one leg because that 5 minutes ran out a while ago. I think that looks pretty good. So again, we don't see back poses as often as the front poses. So when you do, it's okay to slow down a little bit and really make sure you're getting them right because they can be tricky, And understanding the differences on how to apply the abstraction to the front versus the back is super important. Okay, so next pose. And I'm going to get a new pencil too because this one getting a bit dull. Next is going to be, looks like a side type pose and also a super rhythmical. So this one should be fun. So here we go, 5 minutes. We're not seeing a lot of the head. It's kind of blocked actually by her arm and shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Her arm is sweeping down this direction. Her shoulder about like that. And then Her head, I think, is going to sit a little bit higher. So we're only seeing a little bit. I mean, it's covered by hair, so we're not really seeing much of her neck at all, but it is back there. You know, so we're getting some of this back arm. Now for this shoulder, it's going to sit right about there. And then we have her scapula, it looks like, is coming in, connecting here and almost making this like big triangular shape. Right down that way. So I mean, that's a different type of head, neck, and shoulders. When you get the arms up like that, you can get all sorts of interesting shapes down in there. So from there, I'll come in and drop that center line, which, you know, is a side post. And now that center line is actually on the front, kind of. And then come in and find where the connection for the other side. And then I think immediately at this point, I would go in and find the rib cage because it's such a prominent shape. I would go ahead and just kind of drop it in kind of early on. So, okay, that rib cage is going to sit right there, and then the breast is going to sit on top of it. So then from there, we can come in and just find this little part of the hip. You know, we're seeing she's twisted away from us a bit, so we're actually seeing a little bit of her spine connecting down into the sacrum, which is going to sit kind of like right back down in here. And then we'll have that hip connection point right about there. And then glutes. This one got too big, so I'm gonna have to vignette it, which is okay. I mean, I prefer when that happens on purpose, obviously, rather than accidental vignettes, but the rest of it is looking pretty good, so I don't think it's the end of the world. You know, so then this leg is gonna connect down here. Run back that way. You know, same thing. I'm going to add a little more glute right there. And then this other leg. And her weight is on this leg, so it's going to start up higher than this hip, actually. Swoop back that direction, and then obviously it's going to have to be vignetted. So that's 5 minutes. Yeah, I mean, in terms of rhythmical qualities, I think that one looks pretty cool. You know, it's unfortunate the legs got chopped, but again, not the end of the world. So move on to the fourth 5-minute pose. Looks like it should fit in this section pretty well because it's a standing pose and pretty narrow. So I think that should be about right. So 5 minutes. Oh, quick analysis. I mean, it's almost like it's going to be that straight on. You know, it's just off a straight on, and she has a nice bend to her torso. So it'll be, you know, basically that front on abstraction that we're using. So 5 minutes starting now. Start with the head. It's going to sit up here, probably a little bit more of an angle. And drop down this direction. You know, her head's looking down a bit, so that kind of elongates the shape of the head. You know, so we'll end up with something a little bit more like that. And then we're seeing a little bit of her neck out here, and then a little bit of sternocleidomastoid running down that direction. You know, sitting right about in there. And then her shoulder, she has one arm up and one arm down. And her shoulder, it looks like, can't tell. On this side, it looks like it's running right up along her head, over, and then up that direction. And then on this side, it's a little more what we're used to. Trapezius, you know, shoulder sitting about there, and clavicle. That shape up a tiny bit. You know, and then on here, we're going to have that shoulder going up and wrap it around that section of her bicep, and then coming down and connecting to the pectoralis down in here. So find our center line, and that's important. I mean, head, neck, and shoulders is probably the most important. Second most important, I would say, is getting this center line placed, because it's going to kind of determine the rhythmical structure of the rest of the pose. You know, so again, looking for plumb lines and figuring out how this is lining up with everything, and not worry too much about length until this next part. So this shoulder's coming up, wrapping around, if we could see through it, and then connecting down into the lat. And then I can see, just real quick, plumb lines for her hips. One hip is going to sit lined up about here, and the other hip is going to start about here. So I can see for those Riley rhythms, go from the neck up to the hip. That direction, and then this one out this direction, only I think a little bit wider than I had it. Yeah, about like that. You know, then this rib cage is going to be important, because with the arms up, it sort of changes the way these triangles work. So this section is going to get filled in with rib cage, and this section. It's going to sit about like that. So we'll have that lat coming down and connecting to rib cage here. And a little bit of lat connecting to rib cage here. I think I That needs to be a little bit wider, and then we're getting a little bit of pinching on this side. And figure out how to connect up the hips, and that's tricky. I mean, that's different on a lot of different body types, you know, is how this little section is going to read. So over time, as you watch more demos and see different ways of doing it, you'll realize, you know, you'll be able to look up there and just say, okay, she has this body type and her hips and oblique kind of connect this way, so I'm going to use this type of rhythm. But for now, you're going to have to just kind of rely on copying what I do for the time being. Breast here. Breasts are sitting at a bit of an angle. Now again, nice rhythmical leg, which is going to come this direction and just be a C curve going that way. A little bit of adductors and then complete that C curve. You know, and then her foot's going to sit right down about in there. You know, same with this back leg. Find that little bit of adductor. It's cutting off this way. And foreshorten back that direction. That's pretty good. We'll get more into foreshortening later. Right now, we just want those rhythmical relationships. You know, again, if you don't have arms, don't worry about it. Arms are pretty easy to add on after the fact. We go ahead and move on. I think that is the last 5-minute pose. You know, so we had those 4 5s. So now we're going to move down to 3 minutes. So things are going to get faster and hopefully start trying to draw a little bit smaller. If you can. I mean, that's part of what quick sketch is good for, is building dexterity. And part of speeding up is that in order to get more down, you know, you're going to have to draw smaller. It'll kind of force you to do it. And even if it's uncomfortable, you know, do it anyway, because it's good for you. Reset my timer to 3 minutes. First up is going to be a back pose. So I know immediately I'm looking for kind of that back rhythm. I'm going to get a new pencil also because that one is destroyed. So 3 minutes, back pose. Starting now. Come in and find head. down to neck. Connects out to trapezius. Connects to shoulder. Then we have shoulder on this side. We got our head, neck, and shoulders, so then we're going to find that center line. We're going to come down, find that 7th cervical vertebrae, which in perspective is going to be sitting pushed over this direction a little bit. And find that center line. I'm going to go here, and then there. From the neck out to the hip. Again, keeping an eye on those plumb lines. Oblique will connect about there. Glutes right down about there. The glutes are going to sit, our leg is going to drop back that direction. So again, come back up, find where the sacrum is. Sacrum be about here. Drop that rib cage in. Rib cage down to hip. Oops. That's it. That's 3 minutes. 3 minutes is fast. You know, I mean, I drew small and still didn't get all that much down. So I'll finish adding these glutes real quick. And then I'll move on. You know, again, I mean, it's not a race, but at the same time, you do need to push yourself a bit to make sure you're not just getting stuck in that kind of comfort zone type area. You know, because the whole point of quick sketch is to kind of push yourself a bit and to kind of experiment and figure out different ways of doing things, or to practice different things, such as, you know, whether you're working on rhythmical stuff or construction stuff or tonal stuff, you know, and figuring out how to apply it in a more kind of judicious manner where you get things done more quickly, become more efficient. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next one. It's an interesting one also. It's a side pose, but he's got a pretty extreme twist, you know. So we got to make sure to get those shoulders in there correctly, which is going to be tough, especially in 3 minutes. So here we go, say 3 minutes. On this one, I'm going to spend most of my time thinking about those shoulders. Head. Head shape. Shoulders coming up. Overlapping his chin a bit. Then we have the back part of his neck, connecting down to trapezius on this side, and then down to his shoulder down here. So since he's twisting, we're seeing his spine on this side coming that way and then connecting down. Then his arms headed off this way. So I know I usually leave arms off until last, but in this instance, we need this arm to get everything lined up correctly. So I'm going to put it in almost immediately. And then find some of this lat. And then his pec. Coming down that way. And we have some of this connection point right in there. Make sure that's lining up with everything on that side correctly. So then we can find his rib cage, which is going to sit right down in here. And that's going to go ahead and connect kind of to that oblique section, and then glutes off this direction. So his hip is sitting right about in here. So you can see I'm piecing this one together a little bit differently because it's different. I mean, it's not like any other pose we've done, and the abstraction doesn't fit it perfectly, So there's a lot of poses where you just have to kind of work a little more shape to shape and think a little bit more about what you're doing in order to get it kind of working correctly. So that's 3 minutes. So we have one leg going off that way, another leg going off that direction. And I won't do too much more of this because I think that's enough. There would be a foot there. So when you see things like this little indication right here, where I had calf coming here and then just a C curve that runs right down there into the heel, that's something I've seen Eric do a bunch of times and something that I then remembered. So you got to be aware of those things. When you see me do something like that, think, oh, that's kind of cool. That works well. So I think I'm going to steal that. And then after you steal things for a while, then they'll start to become more intuitive. And then eventually you'll start coming up with your own solutions that will be yours and they'll look like yours. Anyway, I think that's good for that one. I know that was more than 3 minutes, but I think it's good to see how to approach something that the abstraction doesn't fit. And we'll have more of those as we go on. So things are going to keep getting more and more complex as we go. So next one is a little more conventional. It's just like kind of a straight on 3/4 type pose. Something we've done a number of times at this point. So 3 minutes, starting now. Start with the head. Again, as we go on, I'm going to start trying to work a little bit smaller. Our head shape down into the neck. And immediately I can see that negative shape underneath his jaw and how that connects over to his shoulder. Now his trapezius is going to sit actually above his jaw a little bit on this side. Shoulder sitting over here. Drop that center line. Come in that way. That way, and then out to the hip. And figure out how that relates to the glute. So I think that's going to be his torso size, which kind of seems okay. I might have to beef up the head a little bit for that, but I think it'll probably work for the most part. Now he has pretty wide rib cage, so we're going to come in, add the lat on here. It's going to come out to his hip that way. Have his pectoralis connecting to rib cage, out to oblique on that side. His hip is sitting down in here. Find the rhythm for this leg. And then he's got, you can see the adductors kind of connecting onto there. Add that little foot shape on there. Little knee indication. And his other leg is swooping back that direction. Again, so that's our 3 minutes. So that's not bad. I mean, if that's what you get for a 3 minute, then you did pretty good. With that chest rhythm on there. Again, I mean, no arms, but it's not really a big deal. I got enough of this leg to see where that's going to go. So moving on to the next one. Also new pencil. So again, I mean, he's got a bit of a twist. So just be aware of that. But for the most part, it's going to be kind of that front abstraction, I think. So thinking back to that, 3 minutes and go. Find our head shape. Head to neck. And his angle, or his shoulders are at quite a bit of an angle. You have one up here. And the other's coming down this direction. You know, and he has really wide shoulders, so just try to be aware of that while you're figuring this stuff out. You know, next we're going to have that C curve coming, I think, this direction. Shoulder might even come out a little bit farther. I don't know. We'll double check that in a second. And then his oblique is going to sit just below this part of his neck. It's right about in there. And the oblique on the other side is going to be about where his shoulder is, out here. And drop a rib cage in here. You know, so we'll have his pec, you know, pectoralis connecting up in through here. Connecting down that way. And then his lats coming down, connecting to his rib cage. And that's coming down and connecting to his oblique. You know, same thing on this side. We have pectoralis. And then we have lat coming down, which is more activated on this side. And then rib cage down into oblique. I do think we need a little more pectoralis. Yeah, something more like that. So then we have this leg shooting off this way. So we're going to have his glute sitting about here. And this leg coming off that direction. And then just quick plumb line, I can see it's going to line up to about here. Maybe a little farther. That foot on there. We have this other leg, which is then coming down and connecting this way. And I just looked over and realized I didn't set the timer. So I would bet that that's been 3 minutes. That looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop because I know that's been more than 3 minutes. So next up, I mean, it's going to be, again, mostly front pose, kind of somewhere in between front and 3/4 abstraction, but it's, you know, then I would kind of push it towards one or the other. And this one I'd probably push more towards that front abstraction, which is kind of similar. So here we go. 3 minutes, make sure it starts, and go. Go over in this section. Find this little head shape. Bring the neck down. His shoulder is bumping all the way up against his neck right here. You know, and then we have trapezius, and his other shoulder sitting back in there. You know, drop the center line. Should look about like that. You know, find kind of our Riley abstraction, so neck out to the hip. And then neck out to the hip over on this side, which is going to be way out here. You know, drop that rib cage in. And I know immediately we're going to have lat connecting here. And then rib cage, and then oblique. I know his adductor is connecting about here, so I'm going to find that rhythm that runs from the sartorius down to the inside of the knee, right in through there. And then that knee is going to sit about like that. So you go, 3 minutes. You got a nice torso and a leg established. If that's all you got, cool. That's good. I mean, nice gestural little legs. Again, I'll probably leave the arms off. Not bad. So moving on to the next one. I think we got 2 left. 3. I might grab a new, well, I think this pencil's okay for right now. This one's like super rhythmical, so I'm probably going to be trying to fit this one. Trying to think where this will fit well. Probably up in here, I think. So it's going to be, 3/4 abstraction and one arm way up in the air, so we're going to have to look for a couple key things. So 3 minutes, starting up in this corner. Start with the head. Add a little bit of an angle. So that head shape's going to be a little different than normal, but not bad. Find our 2 C curves for the neck. The shoulder on that side. Here we're getting a little bit of trapezius. And then this is shooting over to the shoulder off that way. And then his arms coming out this way and then up that way. So go ahead and come in, find center line. I don't like the way I connected this shoulder. I'm going to change that a little bit. I think it should be more clavicle and then out to shoulder. Just a little bit more room in there. And then kind of imagine this shoulder coming up and wrapping around. The neck out to the hip. It's going to connect out to the glute. And drop that rib cage in there. A little bit sloppy, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit and then figure out exactly what's going on here. So we're seeing some of the back of this shoulder coming and connecting down into some of the lat. And then that's coming into rib cage and then down into oblique, right down in there. So here we're going to have pectoralis connecting out to the outside of that rib cage shape. And then down to oblique down here. That's not bad. I think that's basically what we're looking for. So look for the rhythms for this leg. Should sit about like that. That, and then this one swoops way back off that direction. I think that's good. It could be good to add a little bit of the pectoralis back in when you have these arm up poses, just to kind of clarify what's going on in here. That is, no, that started counting backwards again. That was, I think, actually 4 minutes instead of 3. I don't know what's up with my timer. I can reset it. You know, and then, I mean, you could even take it farther and say, okay, now let's find some of the opening of the rib cage. But for what we're doing today, I don't think that's necessary. So, next one. And I think this is the last one for this set. Ooh, I lost my eraser. Okay. It's going to be a back pose, and I think it should fit pretty well. I think right in through here, if I draw small enough, I think it should fit quite nicely right about there. So here we go. Let me get a new pencil too, because that one's kind of wiped out. So 3 minutes, starting now. Here's the head. Down to the neck. Add that shoulder on there. Arm's going to go off that direction. Add this shoulder. Think about where the sacrum is going to sit. And down to the glute. This shoulder is coming up and wrapping around. Like that. Come in, I can see immediately that we're going to have some of the lat here and then some of the lat out here connecting into rib cage, just sitting right about there. You know, so I'm going to have this hip coming down, connecting here, a little bit of that on this side. A tiny bit lower here. That's going to connect out to the glute over here, the hip over here. Change right where the great trochanter sits a little bit. So we're seeing his hips a little bit in perspective, about like that. You know, come back in and add shoulder blades. flat rhythm. Run right across here. And my timer's counting backwards again. I'm gonna have to fix that. That is a problem. A little bit of arm off of that side. And then we're seeing a little bit of leg coming here. Wrapping around, and then we're getting some of his foot. Sticking out this way. Don't like this little connection right in there. That kind of bothers me a little bit, so I'm going to go back, change that up, and really find where I think that rib cage sits, how the lat is going to overlap it. Rib cage, and then down into oblique. That looks better. I think I need to make the head a little bit bigger also. So he doesn't look like a giant. Yeah, so I think that's it. I think that is the end of this set. So from here, I mean, we're going to be exploring a little bit of some structural type stuff and how to apply a little bit of that. And then after that, it'll be a little bit of tonal type stuff, you know, and how to kind of start skipping steps a little bit as things get more advanced. So right now, I'm going to go ahead, take a quick break, and I'll be right back.